Hi, today we're going to talk about surface area and volume of prisms and cylinders. This is a condensed version of these notes. Prisms and cylinders have something in common because they both have two bases. So if we take a cylinder like this one here, we see that there's a circle base at the top and a circle base at the bottom. And with prisms, this happens to be a rectangular prism. There's a rectangular base at the top and a rectangular base at the bottom. Both of these, since they have two bases, they really have the same formula for finding surface area and volume. You'll see that volume is the area of the base times the height. So when you think about the area of the base, in this case it's a rectangle, so we would just do length times width and we would get the area. That tells you how many, sort of square units would fit across the bottom of this prism. If it was three-dimensional here, which it is, and we think about, instead of just area of the bottom, we think about, let's say there's a whole layer of like boxes, not just squares across the bottom, but boxes across the bottom of this, right? Each one of these boxes covers up the base. Doesn't look very clear. All right, so if we divide this into boxes like this, there's going to be a certain number of boxes, like cubes, that fit across the bottom. So let's say this is a 2 by 4 rectangle. Well, then there's going to be 8 boxes that fit on that one layer. To figure out the volume, which is the space that this whole two-dimensional shape takes up, we have to figure out, well, how many layers could fit in this rectangular prism. And so it's really the area of the base, which gives you the number of boxes that would fit on the first layer, times the height, which is the number of layers you could stack those boxes up. So it's a very simple formula, BH, but we use capital letters because the B stands for the area of the base. Not just base, you don't just say base. B doesn't stand for base, B stands for the area of the base. Okay, that's a really important thing. Capital B is area of the base. Okay, remember base does not mean bottom. Base is just the two faces that are parallel to each other and congruent to each other in a prism, and the two circles that are parallel to each other and congruent to each other in a cylinder. Okay, so capital B is the area of the base. There's the definition of base. Okay, volume is how much space it takes up. So you're going to be doing the area of the base, capital B, times the height, so number of boxes that fit across the bottom, times the number of layers of boxes you can fit. That's the volume. Right, surface area is basically the area of each face individually, two-dimensional flat surface, the face, and then add up all of those surface areas. All of those areas on each face makes the entire surface area. So it's almost like if you were going to wrap this present up, how much wrapping paper would you need? As long as there was no overlap, that would be the surface area. Another way to think about it is if you have this solid block like this and you dipped it in paint, and then let the paint drip off, right? Dips the whole thing in paint. What would get covered with paint? Well, every single, surface would get covered with paint. Nothing on the inside, but every single surface on the outside. So that's called the surface area. So we have a formula for that. Instead of figuring out all of the separate areas, which you could do the area of each individual one and then add them all together. But there's an easier way to do this, and that's using this formula. So surface area equals pH plus 2b. Well, we have to remember what these things stand for. P is the perimeter. Okay, perimeter of what? Perimeter of the base. That's important. Perimeter of the base. So sometimes we use a capital P because we're talking about the perimeter of the base. It's not always capital, but okay. And the H here is the height of the whole prism. And the height, capital H, is the height of the whole entire prism, not the height of one of the bases or something. It's the height of the whole entire prism. Another way to define that, I don't think I see it here actually. Let's add this in. The height of the prism, we can think of that as the distance between the two bases. Okay, so the height of the prism is the distance between the two bases. So once you establish what the bases are, the height is going to be the length of the edge that connects those two bases. Okay, and then here, capital B still stands for area of the base. Okay, you'll notice that it's perimeter times height plus 2 times the area of the base. Well, think about that logically. Since we just said that prisms have two bases, it makes sense that part of the formula would be to add the area of the two bases, right? So 2b, because there's two bases, so area of both have to get added in. The pH gives you all of the other faces, the ones that aren't bases. Here, here, and here, and in the back. That's the pH part of it, perimeter times height. And sometime in class, I'll show you visually why that pH makes sense. Okay, surface area of a cylinder, notice it's the exact same thing. But instead of pH plus 2b, it's CH plus 2b. Well, C is the same thing as P when you're talking about circles, right? C stands for the circumference of the base. Because the perimeter of a circle is just called the circumference. So it's really not a different formula. It's still pH plus 2b, CH plus 2b. It's the same thing. What you want to remember, though, is that C equals 2 pi r. And the area of a circle, capital B, in the case of a circle, is pi r squared. So we could rewrite this formula like this. SA equals 2 pi r, that's our C, H, plus pi r squared, that's our B, right? So it's the same thing. CH and 2 pi RH is the same thing. 2b and 2 pi r squared is the same thing. Okay? You might see them written both ways. Okay, so steps for finding the volume or surface area of a prism or cylinder. I think that it is going to be best if we actually do one of these together first, and then we'll come back and kind of look at this list and see how these steps could be helpful to you. You'll notice that part of the steps is making a list of what you need in the formula. That is going to be critical and actually required because when I'm grading your tests or quizzes or whatever, I expect you to have that list there and all filled out, and it's going to be worth part of the points. So you want to make sure you do it. But let's get to one. I'm actually going to let's do this one together. Okay, so we're going to start with step 1, which is identify the base. Identify what type of figure you're talking about. Well, step 1 and 2 are really the same kind of thing, because the type of figure you're talking about is named for what shape the base is. So in number 1 here, remember, base does not mean bottom. Base means the two polygons that are congruent and parallel to each other. Congruent and parallel to each other. So this is actually a triangular prism because I've got the two triangles that are congruent and parallel to each other. So those are the bases. I know it seems weird because we like to think of base as bottom sometimes, but in geometry, base does not mean bottom. So the shape of the base is a triangle. So this is called a triangular prism. Now, everything that we have to calculate is dependent on figuring out and identifying the base correctly. If you don't identify the base correctly, everything is going to come out wrong. So make sure you're looking carefully. Two faces that are congruent and parallel to each other. Those are the bases. So we have these two triangles, and those are the bases. Now, step 3. Select the appropriate formula based on the shape of the base, right? Because if we're going to figure out capital B, which stands for, remember, area of the base. Area of the base. Well, that means, depending on what shape the base is, we're going to have different formulas. Since this is a triangle, our formula is 1/2 BH for the area of the triangle. Now, notice this is a lowercase b, this is a capital B. Capital B stands for area of the base. The lowercase b is just the b that we use in 1/2 BH. Remember, b and h have to be perpendicular to each other. So in this triangle, the b and h are the 6 and the 8. So our area is 1/2 6 times 8, which is half of 48 is 24. So that is the area of the base. That's our capital B. Now, the next thing we need in our list is capital H, or the height of the whole prism. Again, we identified that as the distance between the two bases. Distance between the two bases. So, if we look at this, diagram again, we've identified the two triangles as the two bases. What is the distance between those two bases? This is going to be the distance between the two bases. So the height is 5. The last thing we need is perimeter. Perimeter is the perimeter of the base. Again, base does not mean bottom. Base means this triangle here. So the perimeter of this triangle, I'm going to redraw it. This is 6, this is 8, and this is 10, because it's the same as this one here, right? If they didn't give us that 10, we could have done Pythagorean theorem to get it, but they're going easy on us today. So the perimeter of the triangle is 6 plus 8 plus 10, which happens to also be 24. Now, our two formulas for surface area and volume. Surface area is pH plus 2b. Volume is BH. All right, so we're going to calculate those. Let's do volume first. Now that we have our list, it's super easy. We're going to take the B is 24, H is 5, and we're going to multiply 24 times 5, and that gets us 120 cubic meters. Volume is cubic. Okay? And then surface area is pH plus 2B. Again, we're just plugging in what we already figured out. P we already figured out is 24. H is 5. Plus 2 times the area of the base is also 24. So that gets us 120 plus 48, which is 168. And this is surface area, so it's square meters. Volume is cubic, and surface area is square. So our two answers here are 168 square meters and 120 cubic meters. Okay, let's do the same thing, only with a cylinder. Same process. Remember that the key is to identify the base correctly. So that's really what you're going to focus on here. And sometimes it's helpful to sort of shade in your bases. I mean, it's obvious with a cylinder, but when it says that in the steps, it's just to identify those bases. Okay, so obviously these bases are both circles because we have a cylinder. We're going to make our list. Capital B, capital H, C instead of P this time because it's circumference instead of perimeter. And this shape is a cylinder. All right, so capital B is the area of the base. Again, we have to think about how do we find the area of a circle, and that's pi r squared. Right? Capital B is always area of the base, so it's going to be a different formula based on what shape your base is. So here they tell us the radius is 7, so we're going to do pi times 7 squared, which is 49 pi. And I'm going to leave it in terms of pi. Height they give us is 11. I know it seems weird that this is height since it's laying down, but we identified height as the distance between the two bases. Think about it this way. If you're standing up and your height is 6 feet, and now you lay down. If I asked you your height when you're laying down, wouldn't you still say 6 feet? Yes. So this is basically a cylinder that's 11 meters tall, and it's just laying down. Its height is still 11. Okay? All right, so the height is 11. Circumference is 2 pi r, which is 2 times pi times 7 in this case, which is 14 pi. So there's everything we need for our formulas. We're going to do volume is BH, which is area of the base B is 49 pi. Height is 11. So for the area of the base, I'm sorry, for the volume, we're going to get 539 pi cubic meters. And now for surface area, do it down here. Surface area is CH plus 2B. Circumference is 14 pi times the height, which we said is 11. We're just using all of these things from our list, right? Plus 2 times the area of the base, that's this one, 49 pi. So we get 14 pi times 11, which is 154 pi, plus 2 times 49 is 98 pi. And when we add those together, they're like terms, so we get 252 pi. And this is square meters, right? Area is square units, volume is cubic units. So 252 pi square meters and 539 pi cubic meters. And those are our answers. Okay, so there's going to be a second video similar to this, really just practicing this seeing skill. So look for that other video and a little bit more explanation on how to do certain types of problems. Okay, those are the basics. Don't forget now, you can go back to this steps for finding volume or surface area of prism and cylinder. Follow those steps. Every time you, look for, every time you're doing a problem in your homework or whatever, you can look for that list of steps. This is example 1, and it shows step by step, all done out. Okay, and this is example 2, step by step, all done out of a cylinder. And then we did those two together. Okay, thank you.